Tom, are you okay?
I lost her.
Her?
She was going to be this epic, trilogy-worthy character. I was going to be the hottest writer in Hollywood. But I can't get past Act 1!
You need some writers group therapy. Hello and welcome to Writers Group Therapy.
I am still Tom.
And I'm Roshni. We're writers helping writers. Are you ready for your session? The doctors are in. If you like what you hear, make sure you subscribe, share it with your friends, and give us a 5-star rating wherever you listen to podcasts. You can find us online at writersgrouptherapy.com and on Instagram and Twitter at WGTherapy. Individually?
Yeah, individually, I am Tom_Loveman on Twitter and Tom Loveman on Instagram.
And I am at MoonLilyMusic on Instagram and at Roshni Lamino on Twitter. Well, here we are in
Day 6 million
I
of
know, right?
quarantine.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
I was actually counting it out. I think we are at least on week 7 or 8 of the pandemic.
So close sevens. Yeah, something
Yeah.
like that. It's close to it. Yeah.
Whew.
Uh,
The never ending.
but there's some good news. You found some really good news on for a lot of people who might be in your situation as a independent contractor, right?
Yep. Well, before we get started with that, we do want to tell people we have a great interview coming up with author John Scalzi. He
Woo!
has a new book out and he'll tell us all about it and some other exciting things. So stick around for that. That'll be coming up later in the program. But yeah, so should we start with the good news then about
Yeah, good news. Good
getting
news is
money?
great. Money.
Money. So actually, now this is just in California that I can tell, but there is a pandemic unemployment assistance program, basically your regular unemployment benefits, but extended for freelancers. Because I know that was a big concern that a lot of people in the entertainment industry had when the pandemic first hit. Like, hi, I don't work a regular 9 to 5. I don't have an employer that tracks my unemployment. How do I get benefits? And so they've extended the benefits and they've kind of broadened the scope and made it easier for people who are unemployed independent contractors or underemployed independent contractors. I actually just submitted a claim myself. So we'll see what happens. But I will say they are backed up on the phone lines. So do it online.
It is through the regular edd.ca.gov website.
Hmm.
So the same place you go for regular benefits. And the good thing about it is you self-certify. So whereas if you work for someone else and then you become laid off or the company closes because of the COVID thing, they check with your employer to say, oh yeah, he works here. Yeah. But this, because you work for yourself, they didn't have anyone to check with. So you just self-certify.
Yeah. So we don't have information on other parts of the country, but I would hope that in other big entertainment centers like Atlanta or New York, that maybe they have something similar. So just check in. This one I got from a congressman's newsletter. That's how
Yeah.
I heard about it. So maybe don't if you don't hear about it in the news, maybe check with your local representatives. They might know something. So it's worth a shot.
Other potential good news along the same lines is the unions are asking Congress to restore the expense deductions that we used to get that the tax bill last year wiped out. So you spend money on lessons and classes and whatever you do for your different roles in Hollywood that are your expenses. Used to be able to deduct those, and then they killed that. So they're trying to get that back.
Which when you think about it, that is actually going to be so beneficial, especially because they're asking so many people to shoot or work from home.
Oh
So
yeah,
think about like if you're an animator or me voiceover, and even I've had people ask me to film a commercial from my home, so I have to be the cameraman and do the sound. So if you're doing it all yourself and you're working out of a home office and you can't even deduct that.
yeah. Oh yeah, you definitely should be able to deduct your internet, your computer expenses, part of your rent and utilities because it's a home office then.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. That's great. We really need that.
Some weird news, I would call it. Steven Soderberg has been named the DGA's go-to guy on resuming work in Hollywood because he did the movie Contagion. That
I mean,
seems a little weird, but
it's funny. It's like, I mean, there's so many authors and filmmakers that have written about pandemics. I mean, we'll be interviewing one later on, but it's so funny that Yeah, something, and I don't think they've tapped the people who did Outbreak as much as they've tapped Steven Soderbergh regarding Contagion. Probably because it's so realistic, you know? But yeah,
Yeah.
he's like the guy that everyone's like, "You did this movie. You're a prophet. You must know how to get us out of it."
As we all try to do when we write things about that have science involved in them, we try to do research. Or, if you do something historical, you do research. So you kind of do become a little bit of an expert on your specific area. And I imagine he, had quite a bit of work put into that movie as far as understanding what would happen, along those lines. And I'm sure he talked to a lot of specialists in that respect too. So I
Yeah.
feel like he probably is a good person to have. I would still think they would just go to some outside expert who actually works in that field all the time. But if you're going to pull someone from your own ranks, I guess not a bad choice.
Yeah. Yeah. And it is pretty recent. I think when was that movie made?
2011.
Oh, okay. Yeah, every day in quarantine feels like a lifetime. So, yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was a pretty recent movie. So,
What else? The latest WGA news, in the court case against the agencies over packaging fees. It's kind of a confusing story to read. The Writers Guild is kind of claiming victory, even though quite a few of their claims were basically dismissed
and not only dismissed, I think it was like they
with
can't bring them
prejudice.
back
Yes.
into the court. Yeah.
Basically, the judge said, no, this is not going forward, and you cannot bring it up again. You have
Yeah.
been like chastised. So, but there's a couple a couple claims that are still, being pursued, and they can still address some of the other issues. Even though the court doesn't, acknowledge the issues, doesn't mean that they still won't negotiate about them, because they can negotiate whatever they want. But whether they can, go after the agencies legally is a different question. Those are two completely different, things. Just because they get thrown out of court doesn't mean the union is going to stop fighting for certain, right.
So yeah, so speaking of battles, Universal and AMC are in, to me this is actually kind of amusing. They're in a battle over distribution. So when the pandemic hit, Trolls World Tour was supposed to be in the theaters but obviously didn't make it, and so Universal released it on streaming and made a killer amount. What was the total, Tom?
It's either 93 or 95 million.
95 million. And so they made bank. And so they were like, this is awesome. We're going to do this from here on out. And AMC, which is already, having trouble being a movie theater and all, was like, what? And so they came out right away with a letter that said, and so we're never showing another Universal film in our theaters again. And they're basically cutting off a very big source of movies and blockbusters.
They're playing a game of chicken basically here. Now, Universal says they're going to release their movies in theaters and pay video on demand at the same time. We call that day and day. Whereas AMC is saying you're being stupid, because the only reason that thing did really well is because people can't go to the movie theaters. So they feel like Universal's making a rash decision based on the situation we're dealing with, where all the theaters are closed. They think they're going to do as well on the pay-per-view at home and in the theaters, doing day and day, whereas AMC is like, it's not going to work. First of all, they don't think it's going to be as profitable that way. And since they're going to do that, they're just not going to have them in the theaters anyway. So it's kind of like a game of chicken. So if Universal really believes that they can make that much money on their films and make a profit by doing it pay-per-view at home, that's their option. But they're going to be foregoing any theatrical revenues from AMC theaters, and that's about 1,000 theaters.
I mean, but the one thing is, I do feel like Universal has the advantage because depending on what they had in their queue before the lockdown for release, people aren't going to be going, like, let's say the pandemic lifted tomorrow. People still aren't going to feel comfortable going to a movie theater for quite some time. I was actually talking to my husband. We were talking about, I'm like so overdue now to go to the dentist for a regular cleaning. And he was saying he was talking to a dentist the other day who said, I don't even feel comfortable going to the dentist. And I am a dentist. And he's like, I don't want to go for like several months or maybe even a year because of this whole pandemic. If people feel that way about needed services like going to the dentist, they're not going to want to go to a movie theater where you don't know if it's been cleaned, you don't know who's been there before. it's just, why would you do it?
Yeah.
So there,
Totally.
yeah. I mean, so let's say Universal had 5 movies that were set to be released this summer through AMC. Even if the lockdown got lifted tomorrow, I really doubt AMC is going to see a turnout over the summer.
Do you really think that Universal's not going to want, the next Jurassic World movie in theaters? Do you really think they're going to make as much money selling it on the home market versus, the theater market? I think they're going to rethink this.
I mean, some movies, okay, like Harry Potter, I had to see that in the theaters. Lord of the Rings, Star Wars, even some movies like Gravity, you have to see that on a big screen because of the way it's shot. However, and especially right now, thanks to COVID-19, home studios are really affordable. TVs are cheap. I
Oh,
mean,
they've been cheap. Yeah.
yeah, there are really great deals on huge, huge TVs. You could practically have a theater experience in your home and not have to deal with all the other hassle
And the threat.
and the threat.
And the threat to your bodily life.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess we'll have to see how this evolves. This just came out, and they're kind of playing tit for tat right now in the news about it, and I guess we'll see what comes of that.
I think AMC will freak out if other big studios say, "Hey, we also want to do the Universal model."
But another Disney Plus news: Star Wars: Rise of Skywalker is available. They did one of those May the 4th. They moved it up from, like, I think, June to May the 4th. So May the 4th be with you kind of thing. So you can now hate Rise of Skywalker at home.
And the funniest thing about that, this kind of blew up on Twitter about it. They had a thing out that said, so for the launch they were planning something special, and so they wanted to use people's tweets as part of that promotion. But they had this very nebulous tweet that was basically like, "Hey, if you use the hashtag May the 4th, here's our terms of usage, and we own it, or not own it, but we get to use it as we see fit." And it was so vague that people just freaked out and were like, what? So they did change the language and made it a little more clear, like, okay, you have to use this hashtag and you have to use our handle, and then we can use it. We're not like trying to steal your content, but it just seemed weird.
It kind of flopped hard, yeah.
Yeah.
At first, it was basically like going out on the street corner and saying, "I own the rights to supercalifragilisticexpialidocious" or something, and then expecting everyone in the world to be able to pay you royalties when they use that. You can't do that. So then they had to be more specific about it. I understand why they did it, because they wanted to do a promotion and they didn't want to have to go to each person and ask permission to, put together some sort of tribute or whatever it is to Star Wars. But it's just when lawyers get involved in marketing, it's so horrible.
Well, I mean, I think I understand that they don't want to go to every single person, and you always got to read the fine print, but that's the sad thing. Like, you got to read the fine print. We were actually talking about this off podcast, but um when Gem and the Holograms came out, the live action version, I remember seeing a thing, I think it was actually off of the movie's website, and you could audition for the movie. And I was like, "Oh, that's really cool." And I looked at it, and it was like, share your favorite Gem memory. And then, like, in the fine print, it basically, so that was your audition. And in the fine print, it basically said, when you submit your video, we have the right to use it in the film. And I was like, wait a minute, because it's, first of all, it's very rare that they use your audition footage in the film. And when I've seen projects like that, I pass it on by. There will be projects where they're like, "Oh, you audition, and if we use your footage, then we'll pay you." Well, you have no way of proving that they ever, if you never see the film, you have no way of knowing that they used your footage, so you can't claim payment. So I just think it's a little bit of a shady way to get actors, or in this case, promotional materials, because you didn't disclose it off the top of your thing. It I don't know. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying?
Bottom line, read the fine print.
Read
Yeah,
the, which is sad, but you have to, and you shouldn't have to have fine print on a tweet.
absolutely.
So I know we've talked a lot about the pandemic as far as how it's affecting Hollywood and all the new procedures in place. There's actually been some talk on Twitter from the Casting Directors Association about the protocols that they're going to have to put in place, with bringing people into the rooms and how many people can be in the room at a time and cleaning and all this stuff. But we were actually discussing, is the pandemic, because it's going to end up making things so localized. Actors aren't going to want to travel, crews are going to want to stay here in LA or in their regional markets. So LA was already having issues before this where people were like, hey, the jobs are leaving, even though we're Tinseltown, because of all the incentives in other places. But maybe the pandemic has a silver lining and it'll bring back productions to LA.
I actually thought it was going to be the opposite because LA was such a hot spot that other places with fewer incidences of the coronavirus would actually be able to, be an incentive to go there, like Cleveland or Atlanta. But those places have kind of blown up now as well. Really, one place as good as another. And I think one of the articles I was reading was artists are going to stay closer to home where they live when their families are. So not just the actors, but the crew, so a lot of those people are LA based.
Hmm.
So they're just going to try to coordinate, what space we have available here in LA to, accommodate all these productions. And, they're going to take longer to do productions. So they're going to take up space for longer periods of time because it's going to be a lot more coordinating, a lot more time to prep and, clean and deal with that part of the studio before and after shooting. You can only shoot so many people at once, so you're going to have to space out your shooting schedule more. So it's going to be even more of a logjam than we previously talked about if a lot of it stays here.
Yeah, but what I was saying was a lot of productions were leaving because they could get things cheaper out of state. That
Oh
was the
yeah,
whole issue. But
sure.
because people aren't going to want to travel or can't travel, it actually localizes everything. And a lot of the crews, I mean, I remember, for example, Michigan had a great film incentive. And we didn't have the infrastructure back in my home state when they had the incentives in place. And a lot of times the crews would come from LA, the actors would definitely come from LA. They would use like the cheap, locations and, eat the cheap food and stay in the hotels, and then they'd leave. The post would be done back
Yeah,
here, stuff like
yeah,
that. And so what I'm saying is, when people were already upset because, like, say everything was going to Louisiana to shoot or something from LA, like they would cast in LA and then send you out of state. But now it's not an option, and so it's actually going to bring back the jobs once we open up to here, because there's no point in going to another state where you have to quarantine for 14 days before you can even shoot
I
or
get
something
it.
like that. So
Yeah,
that's the
that makes
silver
total
lining.
sense. Well, the silver lining is, that's more production in LA, but actually capacity for TV shooting was really almost full up here in LA. It's the feature films that were doing the more location based shooting.
Mm.
I mean, there was TV as well, but like Cleveland, same situation. They had a good tax incentive. They had a little better crew, local crew capability. But yeah, post production was all coming back to LA pretty much. But the uh, the difference was that they were pretty much only doing film in Cleveland. So
Oh,
that
okay.
film work could come back to LA, but the TV production was pretty much already maxing out here. They were doing some more TV production in places like Atlanta and at Louisiana, and the Canadian production was always pretty big. Yeah, now like TV and film are all going to want to film locally.
Yeah, I wonder how that'll do for regional markets. Obviously, if the regional market doesn't have infrastructure, it probably won't work. But I even know, for example, certain shows that did film out of state, like let's say you film in Austin, Texas, they were eventually having to get actors from LA because they were just tapping into the local market too much. Like,
Yeah,
in a town like, I don't know, Boise, Idaho, you probably have 2 actors. You can't go to the same well all the time. So
yeah.
it will
I
change some
remember
things in that
watching
too.
the on the X-Files that happened in Vancouver all the time, where you would have one person would be like an extra one week and he'd be the villain the next week because they only had so many actors in Vancouver.
Yeah,
Yeah, wait,
yeah.
wasn't he just on the show last week?
It's funny. Speaking of that, I had a friend back in Michigan. Her cousin lived in Hawaii when they were filming Lost, and he was an extra on Lost. And he did it so many times, they had to ask him to not be on a couple episodes because, in Lost, particularly for that show, people would look at every single thing and think it was a part of the story. Even like, ooh, that potted plant in the corner or whatever, right? They thought everything was a
Everything
clue.
had a, yeah,
Yeah, a meaning.
subtle meaning, yeah.
And so because you kept seeing her cousin, they thought he was, like, really big to the story. He was just an extra, but they had to be like, "You can't be on it anymore because people think you're important to the story."
They think there were, like, clones on the island or
Yeah, like
something.
he's a big clue to something, and it's like, "No, no, not true." But so yeah. So what are you working on right now?
I'm working on a, narrative podcast that does have a pandemic element to it. I did start this about 4 years ago, so it's not like I started it now. But because of that, you suggested I read a book by John Scalzi, and then, I really fell in love with the books he writes. They're really great, and so that's why we're interviewing him today. But, that's what I'm working on.
Nice, nice.
And you?
Same thing, still trucking away at the novel. I am starting to plot for season 2 of Expat. That'll be interesting as far as recording because of how we recorded it, everybody in the same room. We probably can't do that for a while unless we all have a mask on, and I don't know what that would do to the sound.
That would be
But
weird, yeah.
right? That would be very interesting. And yeah, just trying to build a community. We actually started a Discord server. So if you're a fan of the show Expat and you're a creator also, and you just want to like hang out with like-minded people, come check it out. Go to expattheshow.com and there's more information on the website. Join the community. You just click on that and go there.
Awesome. So up next is our interview with John Scalzi. We're excited to have with us the, Hugo Award-winning New York Times and Amazon best-selling sci-fi author John Scalzi. John's, latest book just came out recently. It's titled The Last Emperox. It's the third book in the Interdependency series. It's already number 2 on Amazon's sci-fi list, number 6 on the New York Times bestseller list, and number 10 on Audible if you like audiobooks. It's narrated by sci-fi legend Will Wheaton. John also worked in television as a consultant on one of my favorite franchises, the Stargate franchise on Stargate Universe, which I'm interested to hear about. And he's got a few short, stories that were turned into short films for the Netflix anthology series Love, Death, and Love, Death, and Robots, which are, I think, just brilliant. Thanks for coming on Writers Group Therapy, John.
Thanks. It's good to be here.
Thank you. So you were a former film critic, but you didn't go into film writing. You went into novels. How did that happen?
Well, the reason I went into novels is I am the world's laziest human, and I'm not ashamed to admit that. And it occurred to me that writing for films requires the buy in of like literally dozens of people, right? You have to, get someone to give you a chance with the script, then you have to write the script, and then everyone gives notes and all that sort of stuff. So I could do that, or I could just write a novel, and then the only person that I would have to deal with would be a an editor. And that just seemed the path of least resistance to me. Knowing what I know now, of course, that was a foolish assumption, but at the time it seemed to make sense. And also, for what I wanted to do, I also just wanted to be able to describe the world in a way that sort of lent itself to novels more than it did with screenplays. So that's kind of the one of the reasons that I went in that particular direction. Now, the first novel that I ever wrote was about the film industry, was about Hollywood. That was Agent to the Stars, and so I've
Love that
still
book, by the way.
Thank you. I still stuck close to home with it, but at the end of the day, if I just honestly felt that novels made more sense for me to do than screenwriting.
Cool. Well, your latest book just came out, The Last Emperox. What is going on today with your marketing your new book in the weirdest of times? How is that, different from your past, book launches?
Well, it certainly has changed the game. I mean, what we were doing before was doing what we had done in previous with books came out, which is we had set up a 2.5, 3 week tour where I would go from bookstore to bookstore to bookstore, talk to people there, do the event, and like I said previously, this has worked out great for us, and so we were just going to do that again. And then, of course, this virus happened, and actually going out and seeing people in the real world became a thing where you're like, "Nah, maybe let's not infect people or get infected. So I have to give full props to the publicity and marketing people at Tor Books, because literally in a space of a week, they went from planning this 3.5 or a 3 week tour to changing everything onto online appearances, interviews, that sort of thing. And the shift has been really interesting. I think we get the benefit of everybody recognizes that we all have to stay at home. So you make the best with what you've got. But the other thing is that I'm learning, and everybody is learning how to make these online appearances work. What are the differences between the live appearances and the online appearances? What works best in an online medium? And the thing is that you learn what things work online as opposed to what things work live, and you try to work with that so that everybody comes away from the online experience having had a good time, just like you do with the live thing. It's not the same, and that's something that you do have to recognize. What works for a live event isn't necessarily going to work as well for an online event, and vice versa. So I think everybody is just learning this all on the fly, and we're making it up as we go along. And we're learning useful things, right? As it turns out, live events are great, but the people who are not on your itinerary are not going to see you. So having the online events, where the very first online event, we had people sign in from France and South Africa and New Zealand and Singapore. So the fact that you could do this thing and have it be uh, universal or global was actually really kind of interesting.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Hey, I mean, you got to adapt to technology, right? Just have a big Zoom meeting or something.
The one thing that I have absolutely learned is that doing online stuff is not easier. It is exhausting in a way that live events are not, partly because you give out energy. And when a live event, you get the audience feedback. And with a Zoom event or Instagram Live or whatever, that return on the energy isn't there. So I will finish an online event and I'll have a good time with it and it's enjoyable. But when I close my computer, I am wiped out in a way that I wouldn't have been at a live event. And I'm not the only one who's noticed this. I've talked to other writers, and everybody is like, "Why am I so tired? I'm at home. I didn't have to fly anywhere." But quite honestly, that's one of the things that we're learning. It is really hard to just push all that energy into your webcam and make it work. So again, things we're learning.
It's a very good argument for why technology cannot replace real live interactions, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. You can't replace real life interactions, but what you can do, and what I hope that we get out of this, is learn how online events are can complement with an E instead of an I, the things that you do live. I mean, I think that the next tour I do should be a combination of both live events and online events, that we can do things that address both audiences. But again, you have to recognize that live events are good for very specific things. Online events are good for very specific things. They each require a certain skill that is independent of the other, and you have to be able to accomplish both if you want to do the PR game moving forward.
Yeah, that makes sense. Speaking of pandemics, so you have a series, the Lock-in series, which is actually, I read that a couple of years ago and I got Tom into that series right at the beginning of this pandemic. The ironic thing was I wanted him to read it because of the non-binary writing. He started reading it during lockdown and he goes, "So did you want me to read this because it's about a pandemic?" And I'm like, "Oh no, that was incidental." But now I know you wrote about the aftermath of, how the world adapts to it, but just as a curious question, I know, like, for example, Steven Soderberg has been tapped by the DGA to head the after pandemic response team because of his movie Contagion. I think they're trying to get a hold of was it Dane Cook, because he apparently predicted a Wuhan virus. Has anyone tapped you for being prophetic?
I have a lot of people who ask if I knew anything ahead of time, and I have to keep reminding people if I could actually predict the future, I wouldn't be a science fiction writer. I would be working in the stock market, right? So nobody has come to me and asked for that sort of thing. I do tell people that this is all not surprising for anyone who's basically studied epidemiology, as I did when I did my research for the lock-in thing, and anybody who understands how humans react to crisis, which is another thing that I studied. I did a novella in the lock-in universe. It's called Unlocked. It's an oral history of how the Hayden's disease progressed, right? And for that, um, if you read that, the first part of the dissemination of the virus, both in the Hayden's world and with COVID-19, kind of run one to one. And it's really sort of spooky. And people are like, how did you know? How? And it's like, the answer is this is basic epidemiology. If you're not paying attention, this is how a disease is immediately going to transmit and do. So I can't take any real sort of credit because I was running a very basic scenario, and I am both gratified as a author and disappointed as a human being that the real world response related so accurately to what I wrote.
Yeah, the world building is really interesting. I'm working on my own kind of post-pandemic story as well, which is one of the reasons I wanted to read Locked In, which I, I totally devoured Locked In and Head On. They were both fantastic. Um, and then the interdependency, I had a chance to read a little bit of that because I wasn't the first book of yours I picked up, but that's your new book, The Last Emperox. And these are just amazingly detailed and, well thought out worlds. They're very rich, I guess you would call it. Do you come up with the idea for the world first, or the story first, or I mean, where do you start with that process?
A lot depends on the project. I don't really uh, have a one single process that I do every single time. Sometimes I will lead with a character that I think is interesting that I would like to do something with, and I build a world around that character so the character can do interesting things. Sometimes I build the world first and basically run a D&D adventure with the characters in it. In the case of both Lock-In and the Interdependency series, of which The Last Emperor is the third book in the series, what I did was I had some very basic concepts that I wanted to do. With a Lock-In, it was there's a world changing global event, but we're not going to talk about that. We're going to talk about the world that exists after it 25 years later. For the interdependency, it is what would it be like if a natural resource that everybody just sort of relied on and didn't think about went away because the universe doesn't care what you want or need, doesn't care if you use this thing.
Um, uh, yeah, so your actually, I really like how your characters across all your books, they have a nice snarkiness. That you have a lot of humor, even though some of the subject matter is dark and serious. Is that just kind of from your own personality then?
I think it's mostly from my personality. I'm not the world's most serious human being, but I also think in general, people do find humor in dark situations. If you look at you know, people who are in the middle of a war or in the middle of depression. It's not like people stop joking about things. They use it as a survival tactic to deal with what's going on. So, as far as I'm concerned, it would be more noticeable if there were not humor than the fact that there is. I mean, I think that humor is a natural reaction by humans to deal with the world that's kind of falling apart on them. So that's why I have it in there.
Cool. I am a huge fan of Love, Death, and Robots. That was a great series on Netflix. And also Stargate Universe, you were a consultant for, which is, I thought, one of their best series. It's kind of sad that ended early. Um, uh, how did you get involved in the TV projects, and to what degree were you involved? And do you see yourself doing more of that in the future, or do you see more of your projects, more of your books becoming visual media?
Well, with Stargate Universe, what had happened was Joe Malazzi, who is a producer on Stargate Atlantis, um, contacted me and says, "I really like your stuff. Would you like to write an episode of Stargate Atlantis?" And my answer to that was no. And the reason was not because I didn't like Stargate Atlantis, but that I literally had not watched Stargate Atlantis, and I would be the wrong person to write in that universe. I had literally not seen it. So if I were to write a screenplay in it, it would basically be somebody else would have to come in and clean up my mess. So I was like, no, but thank you, I'm really flattered. And he said, well, we're thinking about doing another Stargate series, and if we do that, can we get hold of you? And I thought that that was just his sort of graceful exit, you know. And I was like, sure, why not? And then a year later, he's like, hey, remember that thing that I asked you about? Well, now we're doing Stargate Universe. Do you want to get in on the ground floor? Because then you will know all the stuff. And I was like, yes, absolutely, that would be great. So for that, I was their consultant. They would send me their scripts, and I would point out like scientific concerns or plot concerns and stuff like that. And it was useful. The way that I describe it is, I was the guy who at a science fiction convention holds up his hand and goes, yeah, in season 3 you had Bob say this, but in season 2 episode 5 we clearly see that that couldn't have happened, so why did you screw it up? Right? I got to be that guy before that guy got to be that guy, so that that guy would be frustrated. And so that was a great job. With Love, Death, and Robots, Tim Miller, who is one of the producers, was also a fan and had asked specifically for 2 of the stories to adapt. And we're like, sure, why not? And then I sent him a third story, which was going to be in an anthology, and he took that as well. And he and I just got to know each other kind of that way. And he's been a really good person to work with, along with the entire crew at Blur. They have been really good at letting me into that process, and I will give them advice, and they will take it or not because that's their privilege to do that. But they've just been great. I'm looking forward to whatever they have for season 2 and 3. I can't talk about whether I'm involved or not. I can just say I'm really looking forward to it. With regard to other work, I mean, we have 2 things that we have officially told people are in process. Old Man's War is at Netflix. The Interdependency series is optioned by Working Title. And in both of those cases, things are progressing, and they will happen or they won't, because Hollywood is Hollywood and you need dozens of people to sign off on what you do. But I'm looking forward to seeing what happens with each of those.
That
No
is
lock in yet,
amazing.
huh? No lock
Yeah.
in. I want to see what threeps look like. That's what I really want to see.
Right. Well,
Oh,
the thing that's really the truth is, so much is contingent actually on who reads your books and what gets made and if that thing's successful. So if something gets made and your name's attached to it and it works, then the interest in what you do increases, and there's more opportunity to see more of your stuff on screen. So a lot. I mean, if Old Man's War finally gets made and comes out and it's a hit, then everything else will all of a sudden get optioned and off we'll go to the races. And then I will never have to work again, and I can sit in a hot tub full of money.
Sounds good.
so, what advice would you have for other writers who are listening to this right now?
The advice I have, if you're a brand new writer, is simply button chair, keep doing it. If you are just starting off, recognize that your first efforts aren't going to be great, but that's like anything. You wouldn't pick up a guitar and all of a sudden rip out the world's best guitar solo. So just keep working on it and you get better. For the people who are in the middle of it and who have kept sending stuff out and have gotten it back and are kind of getting discouraged, just the reminder that this is the process and it's never too late. There was somebody on Twitter the other day who was like, I'm about to be 30 and I feel like the the timer is running out to publish. And then I and a whole bunch of other people came in and were like, well, I didn't get my first novel published until I was 35, which in my case is the actual truth. Other people were like 37, 42. There's no time on it. You just keep going until something hits, and in the meantime, you get to learn about the process. And so, in both of those cases, It is just being patient and doing the work. And that kind of is not like super inspiring advice. Just keep grinding. But that's part of being a writer. Just keep grinding. Just keep doing it. And it will pay off, hopefully, in financial and commercial terms. And if it doesn't, then you still get the actual joy of being creative and enjoying that process, which is not to be discounted. If the only person who gets to see the worlds that you create are you, then someone still has seen them, someone has still enjoyed them, and that world still got created. That is not nothing.
That's a really good note to end on. Thank you. Where can people find you online if they want to learn more about you and your writing?
Well, on I have a blog which is called Whatever, which has been there since 1998. Just type whatever into Google, and it will uh, and it will show up after the dictionary definitions. On Twitter, I'm at Scalzi, and on Instagram, I'm at jscalzi.
Great. Thank you so much.
Awesome.
Good luck with the book, and I'll definitely be reading you into the future.
And we'll be looking
Cool.
for your work on the screen too.
Excellent. Thank you so much.